Hello, mate, to Thrive Nation. We've got a nutrition scientist and metabolomics expert on the show. He is at Utah State University Center for Human Nutrition Studies, and someone who I really respect. He's been on some incredible podcasts. He's well researched and well published. We're going to put the links into the show notes. I don't know how many studies he's got and how many papers he's written, but it's pretty incredible. And he's an expert in protein and nutrition, and looking at understanding plant-based meats and understanding the nutritional aspects of meat. So it's all going to be about meat and protein and exercise today, because I know he's got quite a lot of interest and expertise in that. So we welcome Dr. Stephan van Vliet to the show.
Thank you so much, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here.
Brilliant. And just give us a little bit of a backstory. And I've introduced you there, but meat seems like your deal. Agriculture seems like your deal. I do want to talk about regenerative agriculture. We had Joel Salatin on the show as well. We've had Zach Bush on the show talking about how important regenerative agriculture is. But give us a short backstory and what your passion is.
Yeah, my passion initially started as sports nutrition. So at the age of about 18, I started lifting weights and got interested in I could increase my muscle mass, as is many young men of that age. And it evolved after a while into just a general interest in nutrition. And I grew up in the Netherlands, so close to farmlands, or we are a big agricultural land. So I always had an interest in agriculture too from a young age. So later on in my career, I was able to kind of bring the two together and look at research questions such as, does more sustainable agriculture also have a benefit to animal health, to human nutrition? So that's what we've been working on. But we've been working on meat and milk, but we're also certainly working on crop samples as well. So fruits, vegetables, and seeing if different growing practices impact the phytochemicals in them.
Okay, brilliant. Ons praat die taal hier by Suid-Afrika. Ons praat Afrikaans. So over 25,000 South Africans have moved to the Netherlands in the last 2 years. 25,000 families. I've had some good friends move there to Amsterdam. So it's wonderful to have you, and lots of Dutch here in South Africa.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, a lot of Dutch folks historically that have been there. Yeah, so we won't speak Dutch or Afrikaans, because then probably no one will be able to follow it. But.
Okay, brilliant. But Dr. Stephan, I want to start off with this, and let's talk about your research papers, because a lot of people ask me. I've been in medicine 25 years as a functional medicine physician, and it's been a privilege and honor, and just running a corporate wellness business the last 3 years, looking at biohacking and health optimization. But many people ask me how important it is to eat, sort of grass-fed, grass-finished meat, beef, versus, your traditional raised, grain-fed beef and cattle. And from your perspective, understanding metabolomics and how that works, metabolites and understanding metabolism, tell us some interesting sort of research on the difference, the nutritional differences, maybe sort of how important it is to eat grass-finished and grass, fed beef.
Yeah, that's a good question, Steve. I mean, we definitely see differences between grass-fed and or grass-finished and grain-finished beef, for sure. I mean, we see a better omega-3 profile. We see more phytochemicals, which are plant secondary metabolites. In layman's terms, those will be known as antioxidants. So those are compounds picked up from the plants that are metabolized in the animal, and they generally can impact at least what we know, animal health, and potentially also human health, although for the latter we need to do a whole lot more research. But we do know that eating grass-fed beef can raise the omega-3s in your blood, and presumably that would lower your risk of chronic metabolic disease over time, potentially. What I will say though is that it all depends on what you compare it to, because we've also done studies where we take people off of a standard American diet and put them on a whole foods-based diet. So this is just fruits, vegetables, meat, milk, eggs, so minimally processed foods. And what we see is that people rapidly improve their health, irrespective of whether they're eating grass-fed or grain-fed beef. That is not to say that there may be some subtle benefits to grass-fed beef, but I think the real elephant in the room for most people when it comes to metabolic health is not eating a standard Western diet rich in a bunch of junk foods. So that's where we see that will probably get you 80% there. And then the grass-fed, grain-fed becomes relative to that details. And we don't know how important those details are yet fully. But yeah, on paper, I would say grass-fed looks more nutrient dense, but I would also imagine that any effects are going to be subtle when you consume just an overall healthy diet.
Yeah. Okay, so I hear you loud and clear there. I think that's important. We've got to look at the most important factors, the most important bleeding factors with regards to someone's nutrition and health. And we totally understand eating ultra-processed, the standard Western diet, the SAD diet is going to be the most detrimental. So, if you're going to eat processed foods and a whole lot of junk food, and you're going to then eat grass-fed and grass-finished beef and think that's going to make the biggest difference, it's not. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. That's sort of if a fast food outlet switched out their grain-fed beef with grass-fed beef, a happy meal and become a healthy meal all of a sudden. So that's certainly the case. But what we're seeing so far in our data is indeed that like if people come from a standard Western diet to a whole foods diet, they can eat even if they're eating grain-fed beef and more conventionally raised animal source foods, even dairy, eggs. We do see that we can rapidly improve their health. Their triglycerides can be reduced quite rapidly. The LDL cholesterol goes down. Their glucose drops a bit. So I'd say that gets you, if you're looking for health, that gets you 80 and 90% of the way there. So I think that's important to note for people as well. Well, what studies do suggest is that after eating grass-fed beef, you can increase your omega-3s in your blood as well. With grain-fed beef, that is typically not seen. So yeah, but here's becomes tricky part. Higher amounts of omega-3s in your blood are associated with a decreased risk of heart disease, cancer, improved cognitive function. So maybe after eating grass-fed beef for 25 years, you have a slightly reduced risk of Alzheimer's. I have no idea, but I mean that is a hypothesis. Will be incredibly hard to prove beyond a reasonable doubt because we cannot run randomized controlled trials for 25 years. And I think if we do epidemiological studies where we ask people what kind of beef do you eat, and if we distinguish between grass-fed and grain-fed beef, which is what we're currently not doing in epidemiological studies, it may be that grass-fed beef is quote-unquote protective, but my guess would also be is that people that eat grass-fed beef do 100 other things that are beneficial for their health. So that is an important thing to note. But yeah, I think the omega-3s, that's clear.
Look, we're also linked to Bill Harris. Bill Harris has been studying, omega-3s for the last 40 years. He was on the show. It was fascinating to look at his research and data and looking at the omega index, not only of the ratio, he's more concerned about the index. We've been running omega-3 testing at the practice for many, many years, done thousands of tests. There hasn't been a single person with the right ratio. There hasn't been a single person with the right index of at least 8%. So we'll put the links there, and I think that's fundamentally pointing to him. More important to actually make sure that you got the omega-3 index correct with regards to overall health, then looking at any other factors, even triglycerides levels, even lipoprotein, apolipoprotein B levels, as we've spoken a lot about on the show. So I think it is fundamentally important. The ratios have been out of control. We're seeing 80-1 from omega-6 to omega-3 here in the practice, 50, 60, 30-1. It's been pretty crazy because I don't think people are consuming the omega-3s in their diet at all. And then secondly, the omega-6 that they're getting is just way too much. So fundamentally important for heart health and I think neurodegenerative conditions, which are exponentially increasing. So that's really important. So for someone like me, never missed a day's work in 25 years, Dr. Stephan, I'm just going to get a really accurate estimation from you. My diet's pretty tight, maybe 95% of the time. I let my hair down now and then, run ultra marathons for many years, over 40,000 kilometers on the road. What percentage improvement do you think in my health over, let's take a 10-year period, because a lot of these understandings on nutrition have to have some type of time. Otherwise, in 5 years, probably eating grass-fed might not, but 10 years or 15 years. Give me a percentage in your sort of expertise, having done all this research, what improvement it would be for my health, do you think, eating grass-fed over traditionally raised grain-fed industrial meat?
That's a very good question, Steve, and it's probably not as big as we think it is, be my guess. But I don't know what the percentage is. But I just sort of from what we see in our short-term randomized controlled trials, here's what I do know is that like as we discussed, I mean, you can raise your omega-3s, and of course, people always tell me, well, Stephan, salmon is a much better source, and I agree with that. But think of how often people eat salmon versus how much more common it is to eat food from land animals, right? Beef, pork, chicken, and maybe others as well. Goat, if you go, but at least it's land animals. Now, we do know that can contribute meaningfully to overall omega-3 intake. There's modeling studies out of Australia as well as the UK where grass-finished beef is more common, and they suggest they can make a meaningful contribution of about 20 to 30% or even 40% to overall intake, based on some recommendations of overall intake, which would be some European standards suggest about 100 milligram combined omega-3s a day. I still think it's a little bit low, but that's a whole different story. So I do think, yeah, I mean, my hypothesis would be if you do this for 30 years, then yeah, you might shave or you might have had a couple extra healthy, I should say health span. I mean, maybe, you know, your lifespan will only be increased with a couple of months, but I think your health span, your cognitive function, yeah, in theory, that should be better if you consume more omega-3s over a lifetime. And the same with sort of your looking at the phytochemicals or the antioxidants that are provided through grass-fed beef. Yeah, if you do that over a lifetime, and it's a further way of increasing the phytochemical richness of your diet, then over a lifetime, you should have less inflammation, less oxidative stress. In theory, that should help with your metabolic disease risk. But putting a percentage on it, I'm not sure. Here's what I can tell you though, is that the overall diet quality will trump everything. So even if an epidemiological study would suggest that eating a handful of walnuts can add a few years to your life, I think that's not the case.
I agree with you. You know, I mean, just have more walnuts and you got 2 more years and you got a far better health span. I don't agree with that. But, you know, if you look at industrial raised meat, less phytochemicals, less omega-3, but also all these hormones, you know, that have been pumped in there. I mean, so I've got to push the doctor now because we have to have some type of estimation. We're not going to be writing this in a research paper, Dr. Stephan, but you've got vast experience. So for the person listening out there, is it a 10% improvement in health span, do you think? Is it a 20%? You know, give me something. Just
probably less than 10%. I think, yeah, I think so. I think so. I think that's going to be the case in the context of an overall diet. That's my feeling. From what we're seeing in the data, if you don't consume a standard Western diet, and consume a healthy diet, I think you're 80% of the way there. But yeah, you can gain maybe another 10, 20% by really focusing on dialing in the details. And one of those details could be eating pastured animal source foods. But I'd say that maybe. Yeah, but don't quote me on it.
No, I'll never quote you. I just wanted to push you because I mean, a lot of these things are intuition and discernment. You know, you've been steeped in the research, and sometimes you just formulate a lot of these gut things that are important, and sometimes they turn out to be, you know, very true. So let's talk about plant-based protein or plant-based meat and the difference between that and then grass-fed. I know you've done studies there on grass-fed beef versus plant-based. You know, the plant-based industry is increasing globally significantly. I think in 2019, it was about $11.6 billion. This is according to Nature. Now, I think by 2026 is going to be greater than $30 billion in terms of its, you know, industry. So what are the differences, firstly, between plant-based protein and how important do you think it is that people, you know, diversify and ensure that they get the correct protein profiling and correct amino acid profiling, because I think that's crucially important to overall health.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, that I can put a percentage on, because I can put a percentage on how different plant-based meat alternatives are to meat, because we've tested that, and there was a 90% difference there in the metabolite profile. So despite containing similar total amounts of protein, right? Because a lot of plant-based meat alternatives use soy protein isolate or pea protein concentrate or some sort of concentrated plant protein. So one can obviously match that to beef or another animal sourced food, right? Because you can just increase the amount of purified plant protein that you use. And then the product that we tested also added vitamins and minerals to make for an even more complete replacement to beef. Now, there's 30 nutrients that routinely appear on food nutrition facts panels, but food probably contains 40,000 or 400,000 compounds. No one really knows, but that's sort of nowadays the suggestion. And those things don't appear on your nutrition facts panel, but they can impact health. And these are things such as, like, amino acids such as taurine and anserine and carnosine, which are typically found in much higher amounts of animal source foods. On the other hand, plant source foods contain other unique compounds not found in animal source foods, right? I mean, certain isoflavones or other phenolic acids that are found in plant source foods. So that's the large difference that we found between the two products. It was like studying beef or a soybean reality. So I would say the two are not one-to-one nutritional replacements. But coming back to the protein piece, studies do suggest that if you eat enough protein, 1.6, 1.8 grams per kilogram body weight, at that point, you're consuming so much amino acids that any difference in amino acid profile between plant and animal source foods becomes fairly irrelevant, just because the lower amounts of lysine or methionine that are typically in plant proteins, yeah, you overcome that just because you're consuming a lot of it. So I'm not as concerned about the protein piece. What I'm more thinking about is that, yeah, you just get a completely different food profile, and therefore you're missing out on some nutrients like taurine, like anserine, that can have cognitive benefits or potentially even some performance benefits. Or there was an animal study that came out that says that taurine had some longevity effects. I mean, always hard to study those things in humans. This was in rodents, to be 100% clear. But what we do know in humans that they do impact metabolism. So, and how that would work over, as we're coming back 30 years or multi-generations even. Yeah, I don't think we fully know the answer to that.
So people that are more vegan oriented or eating this plant-based protein, are they lacking? Is there research saying that they are lacking things like creatine, they're lacking things like taurine, they're lacking things like anserine? Has this been shown that they have to almost supplement with these things that are difficult to find? I mean, can you find those in a plant-based diet or plant-based protein?
Yeah, I don't know if lacking is the right word, but there has been studies that suggest that creatine stores may be lower in vegans that do not supplement with creatine. So yes, you probably have lower bodily stores of those compounds. That is true. Now, they are not essential for our health, but just because they're not essential doesn't mean they're not important. If we flip it around, my idea of it is that polyphenols are not essential for human health, but they can play an important role, which I would say is a good reason to eat some blueberries or eat some other vegetables in your diet to get those compounds in there as well. So if you ask me, I think it's sort of the complementary nature between plant and animal source foods that can make up a complete diet for most of the people. I know, you always get a spectrum like that, right? You have people that appear to do well on a vegan diet and are in good long-term health. We have less on other extreme carnivore diet, but at least self-proclaimed people are in good health, right? But for most of us, we'll probably fall in the middle and do well on a spectrum of omnivory, because obviously the people that don't do well on a carnivore diet or a vegan diet are going to stick with it. So that's another important part. So that's what I'm thinking. But yeah, the long-term consequence of that, I mean, yeah, you could supplement with that. The tricky part of that, in my view, is that we are really scratching the surface on what is really in foods, being deep in food metabolomics. If we go all out and use 6 types of equipment, we can maybe get to 1,000, 1,200 compounds that we can reasonably identify and or quantify. But I know we're scratching the surface on it. That I'm 100% sure of.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about these amino acids. I've been doing recently, the last 3 years, dried blood spot amino acid analysis. It's been pretty profound. I've changed many, many people's lives in the last 3 years. Often people taking a lot of collagen filled with proline and glycine. And then when I look, there's not enough arginine or not enough lysine. And there's a lot of sort of disorders or diseases or deficiencies in people's health by not having the correct amino acid profile. And we see this in both omnivores and vegans, although I've got very few vegans that don't need supplementation. They need a lot of supplementation. And I'm not here to convert anyone from veganism, to start eating meat at all. But what I have seen is that the vegans need a lot more supplementation, and the amino acid profile is very deficient. I've got many vegetarians and vegans that we look down and all the amino acids are low. The essential amino acids and other amino acids, they're all low. I've got to supplement a significant amount of essential amino acids and give them those amino acids to help them, and they feel like different people. Then we've got other people that have got the the omnivore or more carnivore diet, and then they've got amino acid balances that are totally out of whack. So what are your thoughts on that? Because I think I've made essential fatty acids important. We'll go to that, but amino acids and just their role in human health is fundamentally important.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins and then the cells within our body, right? So yeah, talking about a primary nutrient, it's protein and it's amino acids. If there are imbalances in that, and it's really interesting to hear from you as sort of as a practitioner, what you see is that, yeah, and of course, for an average population or an average individual on a plant-based diet, or a vegan diet, I should say, because plant-based, the term could imply, I could argue that I sometimes jokingly make the argument that I'm plant-based because I probably get 75% of my calories from plants or something like that, right? It's just a bunch of fruits, vegetables, and starches with animal source foods. But anyway, different story. Is that the if you see these imbalances, if you're not very cognizant of that, right? If you exclude animal sourced foods and are not consuming a good amount of legumes, maybe seeds, and probably indeed a need to supplement purified plant proteins, especially when you're physically active, right? And you want to get up to maybe that 1.6 or 1.8 grams per kilogram body weight, then yeah, unless you're very cognizant of that, I could see how people are not taking in enough protein. And I'd say on the other side too, is that we do know that the amino acid profile between plant and animal sourced foods or protein sources, protein rich foods, differs. So if you have sort of the other hand, a carnivore, right? That as you described, maybe lower in certain other amino acids, or they're consuming either too much collagen or not enough collagen. Yeah, I 100% agree with that, and I think the way to minimize that in a general population is to increase dietary diversity and get it from a variety of sources.
Yeah. What do you think? And this is a very important, because I've taken quite a lot of different views or flack for this, that I say to people, you shouldn't be taking collagen every single day, filled with proline and glycine. It doesn't make ancestral sense to carry on hammering, and people take this for their skin. They take bucket loads of it, and they think the more collagen they take, and then the anti-aging industries climbed in there, the cosmetic industries climbed in there. From just understanding metabolomics and how important it is, people are taking a lot of collagen. Do you agree with people taking collagen every single day on a long-term basis?
Yeah, that's a tricky part, because I don't know if we have a good data on that yet to really say yes or no. What I do know is that, if you look at studies, even of collagen protein synthesis, is that even non-collagenous protein sources or a whey protein can potentially help with that as well. So I see a role for, we do know that if you're low in trans 4-hydroxyproline or low in glycine, right, which is provided usually by collagen, is that if you eat only muscle meats, you're probably going to shift your balance in lower amounts of glycine and 4-hydroxyproline. So I don't think that's ideal. But then if you start hammering a bunch of collagen and take a bunch of collagen supplements and then drink a bunch of broth, then yeah, you might shift the pendulum the other way. So I would say that probably, yeah, indeed. I mean, it comes back to the dose. I mean, you could probably take a small dose every day, or you have broth a few times a week, or you have some collagen supplementation. But I do agree with your statement that, drinking bone broth in the morning and at night and having a collagen protein shake in the afternoon is probably going to be a bit excessive.
Yeah, and I mean, we don't know enough. I think your point is very, very valid. We don't know enough. Now people are taking all these supplements. I mean, we're a big believer in supplements, and I want to hear people mustn't hear what I'm not saying. I think supplements are important, but this continual taking of supplements and not understanding the role. I mean, like you've said, there's thousands and thousands of compounds. Just now in 10 years' time, they link high proline or high glycine to something else that's detrimental if your methionines out or your lysines out. That's the way I see it. I mean, even people taking all these branched chain amino acids or even whey protein, it's ultra processed product. Now, we're seeing significant people with kidney issues, uric acid issues. Firstly, yes, it's the ultra processed diet, but you're taking the ultra processed diet and then you're taking whey protein, then you're taking, other I mean, it doesn't make sense. I mean, and from understanding all your research, what do you think about people taking all these processed powders?
No, I think you're spot on. Honestly, because, I think a food first approach is so important. And when you get your nutrients from foods, there's also some checks and balances. Usually, and this we know well from sort of vitamin or mineral overload, right? Is that if they're bound to, if they're protein bound or bound to other, or they chelated, then if you were to eat a bunch of nutrients from food, at some point you're not digesting and absorbing that anymore, and maybe they are excreted. If you take a bunch of iron supplements or magnesium supplements, those are digested and absorbed with a high degree of efficiency. So you are at risk for an overload because it doesn't come with all the cofactors. It doesn't come with sort of what we think are checks and balances within the body, that at some point you're probably not liberating those anymore because there's, you need digestive enzymes, and at some point it's like, okay, we've probably had enough. This is how much we can really digest and absorb. And you excrete some of that. But with supplements, you kind of are overriding that. And also to your point of whey protein, right? Normally, if you consume milk, it comes with a wide variety of other components as well. Cofactors, vitamins, minerals, and a bunch of secondary metabolites that are probably also cofactors. So purifying it, yeah, it's a reductionistic approach. And we do know that doesn't work. I think a classical example is sort of a carrot contains beta carotene, but it contains a lot of other carotenoids too. If you take a bunch of beta carotene, it becomes a pro-oxidant. If you take a bunch of ascorbic acid, vitamin C, it becomes a pro-oxidant. I am not aware of any studies that suggest that eating an orange or eating carrots is a pro-oxidant, right? So that comes to sort of this idea of obtaining it from a whole food source, and you're much more likely to be okay. And I think the same can be said for sort of iron toxicity or iron overload, which you now see, especially in people that are overweight or obese, that don't metabolize it properly. Taking a bunch of maybe iron, either from food, can even be a problem, but also we dump iron in a lot of things, right? They're iron fortified. It's digested and absorbed very quickly, and you end up with maybe toxicity or some sort of overload in tissue because you end up with a bunch of free iron in your body eventually. So I think those are important things, and with supplements, you are at risk for that. So my idea of it is that supplements can have their place in convenience, or they should be used when you have a true deficiency.
Yeah, and so let me ask the personal question: do you take any collagen or any whey proteins on a daily basis, on a long-term basis?
Not any whey protein supplements. I do drink some broth regularly, And then also at home, we sometimes make these collagen gummies that I have a few times a week. So I do consume collagen, but I am not slamming collagen or any supplements for that matter. I used to take creatine more often, but even that I haven't been taking in a few years, to be honest with you. I consider it more worthwhile to spend my money on high quality food. But when I was earlier in my 20s, when I just got sort of started lifting weights, and I was like most people taking, I don't know, 15, 20 supplements, BCA supplements, creatine, you name it. No, so not many supplements or any supplements at all at the moment. Yeah.
And what about this? Because, I've always believed essential amino acids, looking at some of the data being far more important to take than branch chain amino acids. A lot of people taking a lot of branch chain amino acids, isoleucine and leucine and valine, causing issues. What do you think about that? I mean, you're a protein specialist. These people that are taking branch chain amino acids, good idea?
No, I would eat protein. Personally, I would eat food, and I would try to get my protein from food. If you ask me, I would personally, unless you have issues eating enough protein, I would not take any supplements at all. That's my take on it. And I think, in my experience, at least it's different when you're an athlete and maybe you're on the road and you have double events or something like that. But if you're going to the gym regularly, right, you're probably able to eat your protein together from foods. I mean, it's not, if you eat 3-4 meals a day, it's not that crazy to have some eggs and some dairy in the morning, and maybe some well, I'm Dutch, so I eat liverwurst, but it already gets me up to 40 grams per meal or something. Do that 3-4 times a day, and I feel like I'm good. And so if you can, I would always say try to get all of it from food, and if not, then start to think about supplementation. But then my hierarchy would be, if you can't eat it from a whole food protein, then go to a whey protein or some other complete protein source. Then it would be essential amino acids, and then branch chain amino acids. But I personally, for me, I don't see any reason to include free-form amino acids if you can get it from a complete food source, or otherwise even a whey protein.
Sure. Okay. What about the fact that you can't absorb a certain amount of protein? I know there's a lot of talk out there, and some data saying that there's a maximum amount of protein you can absorb in a meal, that you should try and spread it out over a period. I put actually 7 kgs of lean muscle mass in the last 3 years because I stopped running and started training a lot harder. And I always recommend having some protein after a hard exercise session. But there are people doing OMAD 1 meal a day that are trying to get all their protein in one meal. Is there a limit to how much protein people can absorb?
Well, you probably absorb almost all of it, I would say. The question is, can you use all of it? And the answer to that is probably no. So you absorb it with probably, if you look at animal source foods, with 90+%, but you just end up using it for energy production instead of using it for protein synthesis, which is the main reason why you want to eat protein. So if you go up to 40, 50, 60 grams or so, you're probably using it for energy production.
Okay. So what would be your recommendation? Because I'm like now 75 kilograms. I try and aim for 2 grams per kilogram. So that's going to be 150 grams of protein on a daily basis. How should I portion that out?
Yeah, I would roughly spread it out over 3 or 4 meals, or 3 to 5 meals. But then again, this is also key to realize, is that those are probably details, because we do know that in the lab, if we measure protein synthesis, then it would be like, okay, it's better to spread it out over 4 or 5 meals. But then if you go into a real world scenario, it seems that that all of a sudden becomes a detail, and the overall amount of protein that you consume becomes king. So if you're consuming this in 3 meals, 4 meals, or 5 meals, I doubt whether this will be a difference much of a difference or a noticeable difference in the amount of muscle mass that you put on if you're consuming 150 grams a day, whether you do 3 times 50 or 5 times 30. Probably a detail that I doubt we could pick up. Now, if you have the other extreme of maybe 1 meal a day, and we don't really know that for sure, but yeah, eating 150 grams of protein in 1 meal might be a challenge in and of its own. So, my recommendation would be for generally spread it out over 3 to 5 meals a day.
Brilliant. So you say, for instance, you have a 300-gram rump or something. How much protein is in something like that? I mean, are there good tables and good data on if someone looks and says, oh, okay, I have an egg, that's 8 grams of protein. So if I have 4 of those, it's 32. You know, where can people find out about how much or what the quantity is of different sort of protein sources in terms of the daily needs?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I'm sure people have put nice figures of that together online. I mean, you know, we have years ago we wrote a review that's called the Skeletal Muscle Anabolic Response to Plant and Animal Protein, and we had a graph in there too that kind of suggests, okay, this is I think we took like 25 or 30 grams or so, and this is the amount that you need to reach for the food source. And obviously, if you got it from potatoes, it'd be through the roof. You'd have to eat I don't know, lots of potatoes, probably more than a kilogram, but because potato contains about 3 grams per 100 grams. So, but yeah, I mean, most high quality protein sources, animal source foods, are anywhere between 20 to 27 grams per 100 gram. And eggs, 8 gram, 100 milliliters of dairy is, you know, milk is 4 grams. So it's really, you know, usually the most concentrated sources are definitely meat and fish when it comes to protein. But even, you know, if you're able to stomach it and digest it, things like lentils or beans, I mean, they still contain a decent amount of protein. I know some people seem to be fairly decent at digesting that. Others may not. Daily consumption can have them run into issues. But yeah, those are all things that contribute. But even then, I would say, just for the sake of variety, select from a variety of protein sources within a meal as well. And I mean, it won't hurt, right, if you have some milk that has whey and casein, slow and fast sources, maybe something intermediate like an egg with it. Yeah, it's probably details. I'm 100% sure those are details, and it's not the bigger thing to focus on. So it's not to stress about, but if it helps you stay motivated and on track, then yeah, maybe stress about it a little bit to make sure that you are combining different protein sources.
Brilliant. I mean, you've done a lot of work as I think an exercise physiologist as well, but let's talk about sarcopenia. I've seen more and more people lose muscle mass. You know, how important it is for the older generation. They think like protein's bad. They got to stay away from protein. I see a lot of the older generation being protein deficient and then start losing, you know, muscle mass. And this is very detrimental to their health. You know, how important is the resistance training in combination with a good amount of protein the older you get? Because people seem they can't synthesize proteins like they used to. I don't know if it's, you know, often it's stomach acid or damage to the GI tract that's causing problems, and they don't feel good having so much protein, but they need a significant amount of protein as one ages.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head with your earlier statement. Is the resistance exercise or the physical activity, doing some sort of load-bearing activity. And this can come in various ways. We know that even yoga simulates protein synthesis, but if you walk up well, people don't do it anymore, but if you had to walk up to the hill twice a day, right, it still gives you a good sense of the ability to maintain muscle mass. So resistance exercise or some sort of weight-bearing exercise is king. Absolutely. I mean, that's the most important thing. But in order to fulfill that potential, having some additional protein when you age could definitely be a good thing. And we know that lowers your risk of sarcopenia. Now, if you're physically inactive, eating an unhealthy diet, eating a bunch of protein is, you know, if you're sedentary, eating a bunch of protein is probably not gonna help you a lot. Not compared to doing physical activity. But yeah, it is interesting because 10 years or so ago, we had this idea, or I think we still sort of have this idea, because the studies are still out there, lots of studies that suggest that with aging, there's an anabolic resistance of the muscle, and eating more protein can overcome that anabolic resistance. But in more recent times, there has been also this concern about eating too much protein decreases your longevity. Now, that certainly seems to be the case if you're a rodent. Protein restriction there seems to make you live longer, but I don't think we have a lot of strong evidence for that in humans. Why that is, there has been a lot of speculation about that as well. I mean, maybe protein restriction and increasing longevity is good as a rodent when you need to pass on your genes. As a human, maybe we didn't have that selection pressure. I mean, I'm speculating here. There's a variety of reasons why this could be the case, but we do see that in humans, typically, I would say in humans, it's a bad idea, protein restriction. Yeah, if you ask me. I know other experts will maybe tell you otherwise, but in my opinion and assessment of the literature, I would not recommend someone that they do protein restriction to increase their longevity. What I think will happen when you do protein restriction, you'll become frailer. And that is in itself a large reason for mortality and other comorbidities as well.
Brilliant. So I want to go into regenerative agriculture. I mentioned Joel Salatin came out, Zach Bush came on the podcast, came out to South Africa. South Africa is the #1 user of glyphosate worldwide. It's not good at all. The regenerative agriculture movement is growing here, but how important is our soil at this stage with regards to our health span and our lifespan? What is the regenerative agriculture, in terms of your understanding, and what is the future looking like?
Yeah, I think regenerative agriculture, in its scientific term that we would use, is agroecology. It's wedding the fields of agriculture and ecology. So it's basically doing agricultural practices that more closely mimic natural systems. I think historically we try to subject nature to our will by large monoculture cropping. Monocultures are not typical in nature, so to control the weeds and to provide nutrients, we put them in ourselves, right? By applying herbicides such as Roundup or glyphosate, by using synthetic fertilizers. I think while this boasts your yield in the short term, it's hard to stay productive in the long term, especially if you are using that continuously, right? Ultimately, you're likely to strip some of the nutrients strip nutrients out of your soil. So it's hard to stay productive in the long run. And I think we're kind of at the stage where people start to recognize that, okay, we've did this since World War II, especially in the 70s, 80s, it took a whole nother level. Maybe we cannot do this in 150 years from now or 50 years from now even. So the concept of agroecology is definitely coming up, or regenerative agriculture. Yeah, and these are typically multi-cropping practices, animal and crop integration, trying to improve soil health, cycling these nutrients better so that, maybe we use animals or green compost to bring these nutrients back, as opposed to using something that comes out of a factory. So, and we've been indeed studying that, especially in the last couple of years, and how does that relate to the nutritional compounds, and how sort of we bridge that is because even when we study protein metabolism, we saw this key role for the whole food matrix, all these compounds that are in the food, which got me to think, well, what is the most obvious way by which we can increase beneficial compounds in the food? Well, this is by the way that we grow our food. And that's kind of led me down this sort of path. And yeah, at the moment, we are indeed evaluating a lot of practices such as multi-cropping, integrated crop livestock system, pasture grazing of animals, and how does that impact those thousands or hundreds of nutritional compounds in meat. And typically see, and this can obviously not be a total surprise, is that if you improve the health of your plants, then the animals that are grazing those plants are improved, and then the meat from milk from those animals just reflects their health. So it has what you would think on paper a better nutrition profile.
Well, that's good, because I mean, Give us your comment on, like, if you eat an apple now compared to you ate an apple in 1940, they say you need to eat 25 apples now to get the same nutritional compounds as you did in 1940. Is that true? Has the degradation of the nutrient profile, and call it, polyphenols or phytonutrients or phytochemicals, you studied all this, has it degraded to that degree?
Yeah, I don't know if it's 25 apples, but it's what the data would suggest. And we don't really have, people were really measuring phytochemicals back in the day. But there's databases that would suggest that minerals and certain vitamins, yeah, they've decreased by 30% or so, 20 to 30% on average. So it's luckily not that dire that we have to eat 25 apples, but yeah, we are likely to getting less nutrients. And this could be, have a variety of reasons. Soil health could be related to that for sure. Also, one thing that we've done concurrently is we selected cultivars for yield as opposed to nutrients. So picture that maybe your apple was half the size that it is now, right? But had the same absolute amount of polyphenols in there. But then we start to breed for growth, for yield. So we've increased the size of the apple, and we have increased the sugar content, but we have not increased the polyphenol content to twice the amount. And that, if we study things now, I mean, we don't have apples from 60 years ago, but what we do know, and we know this particularly from wild varieties, and this has been studied amongst blueberries or other berries. Typically, if you have wild berries, they're a lot smaller than a wild blueberry is a lot smaller than a blueberry you buy at the store. As a result, that wild blueberry has 3 times more polyphenols, but it is also probably 3 times smaller. So, that is an important thing too, is sort of the cultivar that we've used. So I'd say it's probably multifactorial, but I mean, the idea that the plant has to get its nutrients from somewhere. So if we have less nutrients in the soil, likely that is gonna lead to less nutrients in the crop.
Oh, so 30% less sort of maybe minerals and vitamins, and then 30% more sugar or 50% more sugar. Would you say that's what's happened to sort of the fruits and vegetables?
Yeah, to many of them, that's about an accurate assessment. That's right. We've bred for starch and sugar and yield as opposed to more the antioxidants or vitamins and minerals.
Okay, let's look at, multi-minerals now. I found in sort of living in a sort of very affluent part of South Africa, vitamin deficiencies don't seem to be a huge thing. Sometimes with sort of your vegetarian or vegans, you've got to look at, B12, we measure that, or folate, B9, we look at that, but it's hardly the case. But mineral concentrations have dramatically fallen off like never before. And in fact, my number one supplement that I often recommend is a multi-mineral, just because people are not getting the minerals like they would previously. What is your view on that, and what are the big sort of mineral deficiencies that you're seeing out there?
Yeah, I mean, we know that potassium is very common, magnesium is very common, zinc and iron, especially women of childbearing age, is very common. If you ask me, I think, of course, I mean, we know from the data that your carrot now contains 30% less minerals. That is true. But I also think it's just a shift in our diet, right? I mean, people used to think about potassium. Potassium is rich in root vegetables, in underground storage organs, things that grow in the soil, under the ground. How many people nowadays are eating beets and turnips and onions and things like that, right? I mean, that's just not that common. It's instead we're eating a lot of processed foods, and at least in the US, our highest fruit and vegetable consumption, I think, is orange juice, followed by lettuce and tomatoes, right? And we're probably consuming the lettuce on a bun and the tomato slice on a bun, so or ketchup. So that tells you something about. So I think a large part of it is that also the diet quality piece, I think, is key. Yeah, that people just not eating a lot of roots and tubers anymore, and therefore become deficient in some of those nutrients. And the same thing, I mean, this is correlation data, and that does not per se equal causation, but lower intakes of zinc and iron, yeah, they track well with less a lower intake of red meat, and because we've made, especially in the West, we've made a shift from eating less red meat, lamb, and beef to more chicken, and we know that contains less iron and less zinc.
Yeah. What about magnesium? You know, we test red cell magnesium. It's something that almost every single person is deficient. I think it's the most deficient mineral in the world. I think obviously the high stressed environment, the sympathetic dominance that we're in, seems to consume or use magnesium at unprecedented levels. You know, how important is, you know, supplementing with magnesium? You know, someone like myself, you know, training 7 days a week, in the sauna 6 days a week, losing a lot of copper and losing a lot of magnesium by doing this. You know, how important is, number one, to measure these minerals? And secondly, how important is magnesium to ensure that you got it at the right levels?
Yeah, I'd say very important. Yeah, especially if you're losing a lot of it. But I do think testing is important. Is that if you're deficient in something, then yes, you should try to get it from food sources. If that is not fully possible, then yes, you should supplement. I'm 100% in agreement of that. I do always suggest the food first approach, but if that is not realistic or not possible for whatever reason that may be, it's best to not be deficient in it and then use a supplement. Again, here, yeah, I think it is context dependent, and but to your point, I mean, yeah, making sure that you know that or have that information, I think is very important. But yeah, magnesium is one of the most common deficiencies, and I think that also we know that for magnesium, yeah, again, another mineral that has been decreased in our food supply. Yeah.
What is your knowledge base or your view on all the different elemental forms of magnesium, magnesium malate and glycinate and chelate, and, you know, getting it in different forms being very, very important for health, wellness, sleep? I mean, using magnesium threonate has been something that I've started using to try and help people sleep, obviously trying to avoid pharmaceuticals and using things like taurine, theanine, and these compounds, which I think are important. But magnesium in its elemental form seems to be quite a sort of tricky subject. Well, what is your view on the research and your thoughts of the different elemental forms?
Yeah, I must admit, I have not done a lot of research into the different elemental forms, so I cannot fully, I cannot provide a good answer to that. Yeah, okay. Most of my focus has been on food sources.
Okay. Brilliant. Okay, so I want to move into sort of the last area that is really, really important, I think, in terms of essential fatty acids and what's happening in the body as we close out the show. We've spoken about, you know, your omega-3s and omega-6s. Those are actually essential. It seems like there's a sort of imbalance with essential fatty acids. Even saturated fats, you know, have been vilified now to cause a lot of cardiovascular disease. And then we've got to look at the different types of, you know, saturated fats, the long chain fatty acids and that, and C15, you know, how important that is as well. So maybe give us an overall view. I mean, I would say protein and amino acids, number one, essential fatty acids, number two, or even alongside each other of utmost importance, because, you know, without the correct fatty acids in your body, you got big problems. But give us an overall view on the importance of that, and then just the measuring of that, because we've been doing that a lot lately, which is not done by traditional sort of medical doctors, and I think it's fundamentally important.
Yeah, I agree. And then to your first point about saturated fat, right? I mean, talking about something that we've simplified is that, you know, we often think saturated fat is bad for you, but I mean, we have saturated fatty acids that range all the way from C4 to, well, most of the food sources, the highest you find is about C24. So you have these very long chain saturated fatty acids. And what is interesting, that those higher circulating amounts of those in the human body, C18 and up typically, behenic acid, arachidic acid, lignoceric acid, those have been associated with a decreased risk of metabolic disease or a neutral risk. On the other hand, for instance, something like palmitic acid has been associated with an increased risk of metabolic disease. Now, there you become sort of, palmitic acid is a common fatty acid in our diet, but also it's produced within the body when we eat a bunch of easily metabolizable carbohydrates. So it could come from different sources. And during my postdoc, we did some interesting studies on that, where we gave people palmitate tracers and glucose infusion and things like that, and you definitely can measure those kinetics. A lot of it is produced within the body, but my point being here is that saturated fat is unsaturated fat is unsaturated fat. And to tie it back to what we were talking about regenerative agriculture or grass-fed beef in the beginning, one interesting observation that we have noted, and I don't think is known with a lot of people, grass-fed beef enriches the long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids, while it does the same to the saturated fatty acids. It enriches very long-chain saturated fatty acids, which are typically neutral or associated with decreased risk of metabolic disease. And often one thing that people are very concerned about, or doctors or sort of within the field of nutrition, is saturated fat intake. Well, if we can shift to a healthier saturated fatty acid profile that is associated with a decreased risk of metabolic disease by having animals graze green forages, I think that is a good thing. At the moment, again, it's hard to say. And when you ask me, like, what's the impact of that long term? Yeah, if you do it for 30 years, it should lower your risk of chronic metabolic disease. Mm-hmm. If you have more omega-3 circulating in blood, you have more of these long-chain saturated fatty acids circulating in your blood. And those are things that we've been observing for sure. Yeah.
Brilliant. I just want to thank you for your time, your calling, and just your work and all the studies. We'll link to your wealth of knowledge. Keep on doing this work, especially on the regenerative agriculture side. I think that's fundamentally important. And you've reiterated many times, Dr. Stephan, is that we need food sources. Food sources are the best sources for our metabolism and the metabolites and the study of metabolomics, which are, I think, is fundamentally important. Any sort of message of hope that you want to give out there? I mean, it's just crazy, the stats. I think that recent study that 88% of Americans are unhealthy based on sort of 5 basic criteria. 50%, I think, of the US population is obese now. The numbers are not looking good worldwide. Chronic disease, we're losing the war against chronic disease. It sounds and feels all gloomy. Looking at the kids of today, 25 years in practice, I've never seen children come to me with so many issues of estrogen dominance and gynecomastia and sort of these man boobs. It's been quite frightening. In fact, for the first time in 25 years, I'm seeing a psychologist. I'm getting therapy just from the secondary trauma of seeing all these chronic diseases in young people and in people that have become my friends, first patients and friends. So I know there's a long story there, but just give us a message of hope with regards to our food and our nutrition, because I think it's crucially important that people understand that there is a way forward. They can do something, and if they start making incremental changes, it has a dramatic effect on their health.
Yeah, I'd say so. And I think the message of hope is that if you're able to connect back to farmers, connect back to your food supply, you'll get more excited about eating whole foods. And I would also say, and this is something I would love to study, but I've heard this from many people, and I've probably gone through this myself at some point too, 10 years ago, is that, if you get off the Western diet and start eating a healthier diet overall, I wasn't really like, eating a bunch of ultra processed foods, but I mean, I'm definitely eating healthier now than maybe in college. After a while, something like oatmeal or the strawberry starts to taste really good to you when you start recognizing these flavors and sort of retrain your palate, right? And then if you also get excited and are able to connect where your food comes from, I think that's a motivator too of doing that. And thinking of local communities, right? Being a steward of your local community, of your local ecosystem, that motivates people to, I think, eat healthier, become healthier. So I think that's the message of hope and sort of the field of regenerative agriculture, agroecology, which encompasses social justice, equality, access to foods, ability to maybe grow those foods in a community garden, which, think about that. Talking about sort of what predicts longevity, social ties. We talk a lot about diet, but why do people in the blue zones live very long? Well, because they see each other at the end of the day at the market square. But, so those are important things too, nourishing these relationships with people. So, and these things, if you start to sort of knock one of these domino stones over, I think you start to really get the synergistic effect. And if food can be a reason for that, to do that, because food brings people together. Yeah, I think that's the message of hope. And if nothing else, I think we're at some point we got to turn the corner as a species. So that that will help.
Thank you so much. Just one last question. I know you're a researcher. Any sort of amazing papers that are coming out, or something that you're hoping to prove in the next 5 years that is going to dramatically shift or change, or something that you're getting excited about with regards to your research?
Yeah. Well, as researchers, we always say we try not to prove anything; we just try to find things. No, one thing I've been very excited about is our work linking plant diversity or plant health to animal health and human health. And one thing that was sort of eye-opening to me, very exciting to see, and we have another paper of that coming out, is that animals that are out on pasture, coming back to my exercise physiology background, when we do metabolomics analysis of meat from animals out on pasture, they have an athletic phenotype, not unlike the time we took biopsies from endurance trained athletes. We took a small piece of muscle or meat out of their leg. So if we take some meat out of the leg of an animal, it's really interesting to see that across mammalian species, you see improvements in mitochondrial metabolites, you see improvements in glucose metabolic health. So what I'm interested in studying is sort of this concept, you are what you eat. And then to take it one step further, you are what you eats.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. What a privilege. Declare favor and blessing over you, Dr. Stephan, in all your work, that you would be fruitful for yourself and for your family, the next generation. Your work is crucially important, and I look forward to just following you. Where can people connect with you or see your papers or website? How can they get hold of you?
On Twitter, my handle is @VanVlietPhD. And then if you Google my name, Stephan van Vliet, you can find plenty of webinars on some of the data where I go through slides, perhaps other podcasts, and then also my Google Scholar profile. We make it a priority that our papers are open access so that they can be read for everyone. Should you be into reading literature, that's certainly possible too, and all of our papers are open access.
Thank you so much.